Good evening, everyone. Welcome here. Tonight we have a special guest all the way from Orange in Australia, Geoff Watson. Now, Geoff's had a long-standing appreciation for cinema and in particular the artistic value that he sees in filming and acting. But this appreciation has led to something quite destructive in Geoff's life. Now, Geoff's a popular Bible teacher and speaker throughout Australia and in many other parts of the world. He's also a horse trainer, there you go, and a lecturer in agri-marketing and an amateur movie critic. So what he's going to share with us this evening is something that reveals a very personal and humbling side of himself. And so many of us are actually are really going to relate to Geoff's personal story as he shares how his heart, his mind, and even his caring personality were led astray by enjoying too much watching of streamed spy thrillers and crime mysteries. He ended up realizing just how destructive it can be to be spiritually overexposed to the worst in human nature. So we're looking forward to that tonight. So welcome to you, Geoff.
Thank you very much, Robert and Sharon. And hello to everybody. It's just great to be here.
So just before we start, we're going to do a Bible reading, or just a verse, really, a couple of verses. And this comes from Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. You probably know them off by heart, but here they are. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. So that was Philippians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7, which really takes us to our topic tonight. Geoff, guard your heart. And the peace of God will guard your heart and your mind in Christ Jesus. So, Geoff, just to start off, tell us a bit about your early life. So, where did all this start in your early life? Your introduction to cinema and that sort of thing.
Well, Robert, I guess the very first thing I need to say tonight is that I'm going to share a personal story. And in some ways, as I explained to you, when you do this, you actually do feel quite vulnerable. But I know that the power of doing it is that somebody here tonight might just agree and say, yes, I've had a very similar experience, or I didn't realize what I could be doing, and it's time to make a change. So in many ways, look, I didn't grow up in a Christadelphian family. My early life was spent I was born in Sydney, but my early life was spent in a tiny town called Barraba in New South Wales, just above Tamworth. And I guess that town did many, many things for me in the 2 or 3 years that I was living there. I learned to ride a bicycle. I learned to ride horses. And I also learned that there was a great lolly shop where you could go down and exchange money for lollies and buy Phantom comics if Dad and Mum really thought you'd been a great chap. And in many ways, that was the kind of really beautiful childhood that I had in that town. But one of the only real attractions in Barraba was the local cinema.
It was a very small town, wasn't it?
Yeah, very sort of measured in hundreds of people, not thousands. So you get an idea of how tiny it was. Yeah. And on that Saturday afternoon, my kind of escape when I was in those years 7 till 9 was to head down to the picture theatre, pay my 1 and 3pence, pay a little bit more and maybe get some Jaffa lollies, and go and sit in a sack seat somewhere because that was the cheapest. And I would watch every Western that had ever been made, every John Wayne kind of Western where he was riding horses, where he was fighting with all the bad guys. I saw all the Laurel and Hardy comedies, the Three Stooges, And, you know, there was just also movie tone news was a very big deal in those days because we didn't have TV. Nobody had TV. And so you could actually watch movies of things that were taking place in other parts of the world on movie tone news. So that was another thing. I would often go back and tell mum and dad what the news was because I'd actually seen it that afternoon. Yeah. And one of the things, sorry, Sharon.
Sorry, carry on. No, you carry on.
And one of the things that happened during that period was, I developed a great love for cinema. And secondly, I began to work out what made a very good movie and what made a very poor movie. And look, don't get me wrong, there were movies later on that came like the Ten Commandments, which was a fantastic movie, I think, with Charlton Heston in it. And, you know, that was very impressive to a person like me. I had a belief in God, by the way, even though I was very young. I was at an Anglican Sunday school, so I was inculcated with Anglican thought at that time. But I really wasn't thinking about much more than just growing up as a child. And the Bible was pretty much non-existent for me. It was there in the background, but I certainly wasn't reading it. So that was the kind of start that put me on this journey to watch media things like cinema.
Yeah.
I guess the question I was going to ask was when and how were you introduced to Christadelphians?
Okay, so
believer.
Yeah, so that happened much later in my life, and I love studying. This was all our family were involved in study. My dad was a very good teacher and school principal and later a school inspector. So we were kind of inculcated with education. So I went as far as I could at university. And the final thing that I did was I studied rural science and then agricultural economics and then went overseas to South Africa because I wanted to complete my studies over there and do my thesis. And I lived in a beautiful town called Stellenbosch. And during that period, because I was pretty much alone and my dad died while I was overseas, I kind of developed a need for something bigger than myself. And one day, after a failed relationship, I'd had a girlfriend and she ditched me. I remember reaching out for God and really asking if God was there. And that evening, I came back into my little room on this beautiful old farm that I lived on, and I switched on the radio. And can you believe, here in South Africa, the Bishop of Cape Town was talking about his early life in Sydney and how, as a young man, about 25 years old, which was my age, he came to Cape Town and he found God. Well, I just prayed. I just asked God, if you were there, could you give me some kind of indication? And he was talking about places that I knew in my very early childhood, living in Roseville and Gladesville and going to places like Woolloomooloo. He was talking about all those places and the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and I just thought, this is incredible. So that kind of kick-started me. And then around the corner were Christadelphians. Now, I have another hobby I haven't kind of let you in on, but in those early years, I used to be a bit of a Jaguar fanatic, and I rebuilt a Jaguar motor at that time there, and I became pretty skilled, I guess, at tuning Jaguars. And Mark Bilton, who was a Christadelphian up the road, he actually invited me up to start an old Jaguar that he'd purchased. And miracle of miracles, I managed to get this 1948 Jaguar going. And that evening we sat down kind of so excited, and he began to talk to me about the kingdom of God and the hope, that offered. And that was my kickstart. I really then became so entranced with the scriptures. I did all my due diligence, went around all the churches just to have a look and just see what they were teaching and what their dynamics were, and came back to that beautiful Christadelphian community in Stellenbosch. So that's how at the age of 27, I was baptized. Wow. And so that's been my journey, and it took me overseas to actually find the Christadelphians there.
Okay. So were you asking questions at that point, or when this brother was sharing with you, that just what was in his heart and he just wanted to share, or how did that come about?
What, that conversation with Mark?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what actually happened was he asked a leading question. He said, "What do you think's going to happen to the world?" And can you believe at this time was the time of Watergate? And Richard Nixon was the president of the United States, and things were not good between Russia and US, a bit like they are now. It was a Cold War still pretty much in action, and nobody trusted Richard Nixon. We did not trust him. And we thought he would press that button. Many of us thought he would press the red button, which would bring in nuclear war. So I said to Mark, look, this world is going to blow up, and that's what's going to happen. And I hope it's quick. and that's when he said, Geoff, it's not going to happen that way. And I said, so how can you be so certain of that? And he said, have you read the Bible? And I said, no, but I'm thinking about it. And he said, well, look, I'm going to take you to a passage in Daniel chapter 2. And we read that. And suddenly I saw that the kingdom of God was promised very, very clearly. And I said to him, I have never heard about the kingdom of God. I hadn't. I really didn't understand it in any way, shape, or form. So I was like blotting paper from that point on. I was ready to learn. And he and the Christadelphians there were just so willing to help me out and to take me into their lives.
Cool.
Well, that's awesome. That's just a wonderful story.
Yeah. So if we skip forward in history a little bit to a couple of years ago, 2018.
Yep.
You said something made a big difference in your life then. Do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, sure. So I want to stay on the topic tonight because this is really important. Like I'm happy to go down that little byway there, but no, what's really important for me in talking tonight is that about 2018 we got Netflix. And I think half of Australia got Netflix, and I guess over in New Zealand people got Netflix, and it was a streaming service. So up until then, even though we weren't avid TV watchers, we were occasional watchers. We certainly didn't watch it during the day, and maybe at night we might watch the news sometimes, and then maybe another show kind of that was on. What really changed for us was that these streaming services were now offering a whole range of movies and a whole range of TV series, to be honest, that we had never heard about. And many of the movies I'd heard about, but definitely not these TV series. And so what we started doing was finding series that we thought we would see as enjoyable. And many of these series were very benign, let me tell you. They were great comedies, or they were great family kind of relationship situations that I thought were very well put together. And so I was watching with Lauren. We were watching some of these TV series, and quite honestly, we weren't worried at all about what we were thinking about or doing at that early time. But then what happened was they started bringing on these crime and spy thrillers. Particularly, you might have heard of the word noir, which means black, I think, in French. The noir crime series, which were based in Scandinavia and to some extent Britain. And it was just opening up a whole new way of looking at those cultures in Britain and in Scandinavia. And what I began to realize was that the best and most professional directing and acting was not in these early series that I've been watching, but in these new series. And I guess that's why I started watching them, because, look, you can rationalize anything, anything that's attractive. And my attraction was to watch how these things were put together, much more than the content, right? So the content wasn't the main thing that attracted me. It was just how well the directing and the acting was being professionally managed.
So
And
the artistic value of it, really.
Yeah,
As opposed
yeah.
to the, yeah.
Yeah, and I would have and I knew this was true because when I was talking to other people about some of these series, I very rarely talked about the content. I would talk about the way a new director had been shaping the putting together of that particular crime series, and how he had chosen some new actors and actresses who were doing some very powerful acting to draw you in, and so people would say, yes, look, I've seen that person before in another series, and now they're here, and I say, yeah, they're here, and so that was the kind of conversation I'd be having. The content was far less the issue.
Yep. So how much time were you spending watching, like, in a week?
In a week, I probably would be watching, say, maybe 7 to 10 hours a week, depending on what was happening in the week. Some weeks, if we had a lot of things going on, and sometimes we did, then it might only be 2 or 3 hours. And other weeks, if it was a kind of a relaxed week or something like that, then we might watch a series that ran from one night to the next. This is what you can do on Netflix. If you like the series, you can watch one evening, and you think, oh, I'd like to watch the next episode now. So the next evening, you click on episode 2, and so that's the way in which the streaming services, I think, attract you in.
Yeah. And you talked about, when we were talking the other day, you talked about being escape time.
Yeah.
This was part of your escape time, just getting out of the events of the day and into something just a bit different.
Yeah, and I think this is the subtext, isn't it, of what we're talking about now, is just realizing that we all need escape time. Please don't get me wrong at all in what I'm sharing tonight, to walk away with the idea that we don't need escape time. We absolutely need escape time from everyday life, because we're all under pressure in some way, shape or form. And when I think back to my childhood, which was fairly uncomplicated compared to what children are confronting today, they're under pressure. That they have a lot of things going on that I didn't even contemplate. So I would suggest that, yes, we do need to find ways to relax. And I suppose at night, because you might sit down and you might do a Bible reading. Lauren and I tend to do our own separate Bible readings these days, so we don't follow the 3 readings a day, which we did for about 25 years, by the way. So that was very much part of our early life with the kids. But yeah, we might do that. Or Lauren is actually studying at the moment, so she's doing a course in counselling. So she may well focus on that some evenings. And I was doing a lot of speaking too in these last couple of years. So I would spend a lot of time preparing for that. And the other thing I have to also add is that I got into horse training about 6 or 7 years ago, and suddenly these these streaming services and the web services were offering all these fantastic videos on how to train horses. So I would spend time doing that, and so that I could remember them, I would actually transpose the key ideas from the videos into, say, a typed kind of reflection that I would have. So you can see that all these kinds of things are going on. This is not just every night I'm sitting down watching TV, but I certainly have to admit that there was this new streaming service which attracted me.
Yep. Now, one of the ways you described it the other day was using the word sabotage.
Yeah.
Do you want to explain that?
Okay. So look, the really important message I guess I want to convey tonight for me personally was that I didn't realize that I was unaware that this idea of literally watching the worst in human nature, which is what these spy thrillers and these noir crime series are all about, was actually changing me, changing my attitudes, and really creeping up on me in a way that I wasn't aware of. Because, as I mentioned a little while ago, I felt close to God. During these last 2 years, I wasn't feeling as though my faith was, in any kind of crisis or anything like that. I really felt, in fact, I knew I was growing in my relationship with God, and I felt really good about that. So this is where it crept up unawares. Now, what crept up unawares was that my attitudes towards people who I would call victims. Now, that's a very broad term, but victims are people who, I guess, are on the rough end of life, and they might be going through some very difficult personal times. They might even be physically and sometimes mentally disabled in some way. Now, I'm very much aware of that because I volunteer for Writing for the Disabled, and I love going down there and working with the disabled children, and we put them on ponies and horses, and our task is to lead them around and give them a great experience for riding horses, which actually does amazingly have a fantastic impact on most of those children. And yet they're very disabled in many cases. I'll just give you one example. One day, the child I was leading just went catatonic, just wasn't moving and wasn't doing anything, and ultimately we had to stop what I was doing and help her off because she was frozen. Another time, a child would just go into explosive laughter and wave their hands around, and somebody would say, "Oh, she's on the wrong medication today," you know. So and you have to deal with the horse while all that's going on, and so all of this is just part of my experience, my life experience. But my attitude had shifted because in these the videos and things that I was watching, the victims are just collateral damage. They are not the main game at all. The main game is the heroes who are out to find those enemies who are causing the victims all the pain and sorrow. The victims are kind of just there. And I was finding that over time I was losing compassion for people in that situation because I was always being swept up with the rest of the agenda of the videos, which was all about who's the hero or heroes or heroines, and what are they doing? How are they overcoming the enemies? And I think that's what crept up on me.
What alerted you to the fact that what you were watching was contributing to this change in attitude towards people?
I knew the attitude had changed, but I did not know why. Looking back, of course, I'm telling you all this, it's obvious, but at that moment, I did not know why. So I prayed about it. And this is what I do in my life. I find that when I have an issue or a problem, the best thing I can do is talk to Jesus and the Father about it, which is what I do. And I pray for them to grant me wisdom to see what's happening and help me understand it so that I can do something about it. And I guess what happened for me was that over a period of maybe a couple of months, maybe, my conscience started to be pricked in terms of watching these streaming services. And then one night, Lauren said to me, Geoff, do you think it's really good that you and I should even be watching this stuff? She said, I don't really think I want to watch this anymore. And of course, what she was referring to then was the content. It was the content that she was referring to. And I had rationalized, as I said, because I was attracted to the professionalism, I had rationalized that it was okay to watch this stuff if you're watching it for a different reason, which I was, and therefore, when she alerted me to the darkness of this content, a light went on in the darkness. I suddenly thought to myself, this is it. This is affecting me. And and it was like a Nathan and David moment in, King David, when Nathan the prophet came to him. It was, he said, thou art the man, you are the man, David. Because David was angry with that rich man who'd taken the poor man's lamb and killed it for the traveler. And David said, oh no, this is a terrible thing, that rich man, should be punished terribly for this. And Nathan said, you are the man. And I think Lauren was saying to me, Geoff, you are making these choices. And I had to admit I was. So that was the revelation.
Right. Yeah. And how long did that take, that period of time before that realization came?
Like, I've been watching these things I would say probably for about 18 months. Yeah, 18 months to 2 years. So that would be about the time period that it took to sabotage me, as you said.
Yeah. And so what did you do at that point when the realization came? What did you do?
Look, sometimes, and I don't do this every time, but this time I knew very deep down that this was the problem. And I confessed to God that I had made some very poor choices. I had been making some very poor choices. And I said to him, look, please give me the strength of character to step away from this now. Please let me let this go. I don't need to watch these things anymore. So that was my kind of turning point. I confessed and I had to repent. And then repent means a new mind. I needed a new mind. But remember, I'm attracted to this stuff, right? This has been going on for a fair while. This is a kind of a habit that had built up. And Sharon, remember you and I were talking a little bit about this, that there's a progression, in our lives, that what we think about becomes our actions. And our actions and our thinking become our attitudes. And then our attitudes become our behavior and our habits. And then our habits ultimately determine our identity. And identity is very much about our character. So if we really want the character of Christ, we have to start with our thoughts first. And what are we thinking about? What are we allowing into our heart and mind? And, God really is trying to say to me anyway, Geoff, I want your heart to change. I want you to change from your natural self-centered heart to a beautiful heart that Christ has for me. That's the new heart. An honest and a good heart, as Jesus put it in the parable of the sower. We can bring forth fruit from an honest and good heart. So I was sabotaging that honest and good heart.
Yeah, I love that progression. It's a neat progression.
It is a neat one, isn't it?
Yeah. I do have a picture of that, and I'll just see if I can share that. Hang on, that you sent through to us.
Yep, by all means.
Here it is. Oh, hang on. Try that.
Yeah. Okay. So this was a slide that I actually put together to give an exhortation on guarding our heart, which is very much on the same theme that we're talking tonight. And before I just go through those points again, do you like the Roman soldier? Isn't he fantastic?
Yeah.
You wouldn't want to meet him on a battlefield or on the dark night, right? So he's the man. But he's, you know, like he's guarding whatever he's guarding at that tent behind him with standing up there with his spear. And I was trying to express the idea here on this slide that our heart matters, because from our thoughts spring our attitudes, from our attitudes spring our actions, from our actions spring our habits and conduct, from our habits and conduct spring our character, and our character essentially defines who we are, our identity. So I think this is a wonderful framework for thinking about our life before God, and understanding that we can change any of these things with God's strength and God's hand. And I guess this is what tonight's about.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. No, that was fantastic. So just a slight shift then. What would you say is a good balance in you know, getting that escape time and maintaining something that doesn't derail our hearts and our character?
Look, I think the first thing I've realized in life, and I did express it to both of you not so long ago when we were talking, is that you've got to be really careful when you totally cut something out of your life. Totally, I mean. Now, if it's like, if, for example, you decide to give up smoking, well, yes, you probably need to totally cut out smoking. But there are many things that are in our escape time which we can simply change and get a different balance. So some people I know who are listening tonight will say, well, I will never have a TV in my house, right? That's the last thing I want in my house. And if you've never had a TV in your house, keep it that way, you know, because that's where you're at, and that's important that you've made those choices. But for many of us, we actually do have a TV in our house, and so therefore you've got to try and find a balance. Now, could I suggest
that devices of some sort as well?
Sorry?
And just about all of us have devices of some sort as well, which essentially are the equivalent of a TV if you're wanting to stream stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And so in a way, probably I think it's important for me to say that the balance that I've struck with television is to go back to things that are relatively benign and also enjoyable as well. So I actually look forward to seeing something that it might be a documentary, for example, or it might be a romance or something like that, if that takes your fancy. And it could just simply be a travel thing, you know, that you might enjoy, or you can go on to watching something that is very newsworthy. So all of these things are possible, and in fact, that's what Lauren and I have now changed to. We actually discuss much more now what we think we will watch, and we are very careful now to just exclude things that don't match up with what I was discussing earlier.
Yeah.
What was it hard to let go of the other stuff? Was it difficult?
It was a little bit, yeah. I have to admit that. It was a little bit difficult to let it go, but because I had this Nathan the prophet kind of moment, and not everybody gets it this way, but I happened to get it that way, right? So it was as though God finally said, look, Geoff, this is it. This is the problem. You need to do something about it. So I was okay with that. I thought, yeah, I can cut this out. And I did. Probably within a week, everything was gone. I wasn't watching anything anymore. That was pretty quick. But what did take much longer was for my attitude to shift back. So remember, watching this stuff. for a long time. And now it took a long time, in my terms anyway, for me to find that compassion that I knew I'd had earlier on and I needed to have again, and to
Right.
feel real great empathy for people who were struggling and were not coping, or just were facing mental or physiological difficulties.
Right.
And so I took great heart from, say, other people in writing for the disabled, who were very loving and very compassionate towards these beautiful children, even when they're doing crazy things, as I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's that did take some time, but I can say that it quite now, it's probably taken about 4 or 5 months, but I feel that compassion has returned now.
Right.
That's really cool. And you're seeing God working in your life and starting to heal you and
Yeah,
and bringing you back to Him.
I think so. And yet, in some ways, Robert, I wasn't so far away from him in other things.
Mm.
And we talked about living this duality. Now, I didn't actually expound on that when I was chatting to you, but I'd like to just
Yep.
take a moment to talk about this.
Yeah, sure.
One of the things that I've realized is that if we want to live our life in Christ, every part of us needs to be open to Jesus and the Father. He says it beautifully in John 15, around about verse 5. He says, "Without me, you can do nothing." So that pretty much says, well, you needed Jesus for everything. And you can see what I did in taking on those streaming services. I compartmentalized my life again. Now, I knew not to do that, right? In fact, I've been very much aware of not having compartments in my life and saying, well, this is my hobby and I don't really need you in this, Jesus and the Father. I don't need this. I can cope with this. I'm okay. Human nature just wants to do this. We just love getting our own little cupboard and just going in there and having doing it ourselves. And I guess this is the thing that it crept up on me, that I hadn't realized I was excluding Jesus and the Father from this particular escape time.
Yeah.
And
So
when
I suppose if we just go back to a slightly earlier question, making sure that when we talked about escape time and healthy escape times, making sure they are something that you'd be happy sitting down next to Jesus doing, I suppose.
I think that's very true. I think that's very true. The only thing that I can say is that sometimes you're doing something or you're watching something and you're surprised by what emerges. It wasn't what you were expecting, right?
Yeah.
And then you think, now, do I keep watching this or keep doing this, or do I stop? Now, you know and I know that a lot of the time we keep watching this and we keep doing this
Yeah.
until at some point we say, I know, I got to stop now. This is not good.
It's too much.
But yeah. So again, I think it's a beautiful thing you're saying, Robert. Can I invite Jesus into this activity and feel good about that? I think it's great. That's really a good way to put it. And so can you believe when I'm horse training, Jesus is right there for me. I ask him, I invite him in to the lesson. And sometimes I realize that he's actually done something that prevented me from having a pretty difficult or challenging moment. And I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. So we've talked pretty much mostly about what we're watching, like perhaps through Netflix, but I guess gaming has a very similar problem, or can create a very similar problem.
Sharon, it can. And look, again, taking this as a personal story tonight, I have a nephew who was addicted. Thankfully, he's no longer addicted to those. I think they were civilization building games, and he was addicted because he told me this. He was addicted because the game was aspirational. You wanted to move to the next level. It was challenging. And the second thing was he was not doing this alone. He had other people that he knew, not personally necessarily, but they were clients or participants in the game. And so it was a shared thing, and he enjoyed that as well, that shared thing. And there was a time when I happened to know that he was spending up to 18 hours a day gaming.
Wow.
So that pretty much has to be addiction at that time in his life. And, you know, I think in some ways he was, again, escaping. I don't fully understand what it was that drove him to maybe to reach out for gaming in that way. But, you know, all of us can easily find, as I said earlier on, a rationalization for something that attracts us. We can easily do that. And but he had another side to his life, which I'm so glad he's now expressing. He is a master environmentalist of a great ability, so much so that Aboriginal people come and talk to him about the plants and the animals that he knows in a particular area and region. He's just got such deep insight into them. And so he's really a lovely guy from many, many angles. But this was a period that he went through, and I'm so glad now that he's pretty much out of it. So, yes, that can again grab you. It can pull you in, and there may be a balance in there. Look, I don't engage in gaming, so I'm not the best person to talk about it. I just happen to know that this has been part of our family story.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, one other thing you wanted to talk about, and you said the other day, remind you about this, arsenic.
Arsenic. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah. I was reading, over the years, I've read about arsenic. And what really got me going was apparently Napoleon was poisoned with arsenic on the island of Elba. And so much so when they had to exhume him and take him off Elba, his body had hardly deteriorated at all. Everybody was astounded, and they suspected that he'd been poisoned, but they never really could prove it. But apparently, that's the kind of historical record that I was reading about. And arsenic's a very interesting thing because, as you know, it's a poison, but in very small quantities, it was used in facial creams up until the 1920s because it made your face glow. And very minute quantities, not a lot, but it was enough to do that. But of course, ultimately, if you keep imbibing arsenic, you get sicker and sicker, and you finally die. And I think this is the sabotage route that sometimes we get on. If we're not aware of the arsenic, we could end up very, very. We get a glow initially, don't we? But then at the end, we might lose the whole story.
Yeah. Yeah. Good picture.
That is,
Yeah.
It's very, very good picture. Do you want to ask the last question?
You go ahead.
Okay. What would you say to someone who is trying to make the same choices like you've been able to make, whether they're addicted to movies or gaming or reading romances or reading murder stories or whatever it might be, where something nasty is sort of subtly going in, no matter how much we've tried to rationalize it? What would you say to them?
Look, the very first thing I would say is just be aware of the content that you're contacting. That's really, really important, because, look, as you probably mentioned in the very beginning, I've been involved in agribusiness marketing for the last 30 years. This is helping farmers market their products so much more effectively than they have been in the past. So marketing is very, I know how people can reach out to an audience through marketing, and there's a science to it, a lot of science to it. And when people write novels or create games or videos or streaming services, guess what? The marketer is very much part of that. They're saying, what do we have to do to attract and hold an audience?
Mm.
And when you realize that, when you become aware of that, that's the time when you might say, okay, so do I really feel that I'm being manipulated here? Is it just because this racy novel is so well put together that I really can't stop, Or is the content now starting to sabotage my spiritual heart? And I think that's the first thing I would say. Just start to be aware. The second thing I would say is really find your passion for escape time. Do what you love doing in your escape time, not just something that's ho-hum or I'll get into that because it's easy and convenient. You might have to work hard to do something. I can tell you horse training is a challenge. It really is a challenge. You've eventually got to get on that horse, and you really don't know what's going to happen half the time with that horse.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of investment to want to even do that. Why do I do it? Because it's a childhood passion that I have a great blessing to live out just now in my life. So that passion is a beautiful thing, but I have to temper it, because Lauren will say to me, "Are you going to go riding again?" I say, no, I'm going to come into the garden. We'll do the garden today. This will be good.
Yeah.
So this balance, thinking about your balance, is really important. But please don't just cut off your nose and spite your face, because you'll rebel back in some other way. That's the other thing. How human nature is too complex to just always say, "Oh, I'll never do that again," because you probably will. And you've got to be able to say, no, I'm going to choose something better than this, something that I really love doing, even if I have to work a little bit harder. It's not so easy and convenient to do it, but I'll do it. So that those two things I think are really important. And just be aware too that Jesus and the Father will be there for you. If you reach out to them and you bring them into your escape time, there'll be a blessing there, and you'll love it, because they know what's good for you. And I think that's the other thing I've realized, is they don't just want to cut you off from your hobbies, as long as your hobbies don't cut you off from God.
Yeah, that's cool.
That's lovely. This is a fantastic point to finish our discussion, I think. And we really are thankful to you, Geoff, that you've been prepared to chat with us tonight and share this very vulnerable part of your life, because you brought out some fantastic principles and ideas and warnings, and we're really thankful for that.
Yeah, thank you very much. We've really appreciated it. I've learned a lot from you. I'm sure you have too.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure there's someone that's listening tonight, or someone that's going to be picking up this recording, that's going to be going, "Wow, that's exactly what I needed to hear." So thank you so much, Geoff.
Well, Robert and Sharon, before we close off this little section, can I just thank you for your openness and the love that I felt reaching out to me all across the Tasman Sea. It's just wonderful. And by the way, I've been to New Zealand, and I just had fabulous time speaking there on a couple of occasions and traveling around on other occasions. You have a wonderful, wonderful country. And it's just beautiful to be with you tonight.
Yeah, do come again when we're open.
Yes.
Next week we have a break. So this is what's happening in the next few weeks. We have a break next week, 19th of October. We are going to be having a story time with Toby and Michelle Wiedemann. Sorry, I'll get it right before we get there. So that's what they're going to be talking about. They're going to be talking about story time. So it's about choosing books and stories for children to read that again, like we've been discussing tonight, really, that are putting good ideas and good thoughts and good morals into our children's mind. And so often we go to the library and we just pick up a few books, as we have done when we've had small kids, and pick up a few books and bring them home and then read them to the kids. And there's been one or two that we've gone, ooh, not reading that one anymore. But we haven't given it a lot of thought. And Toby and Michelle have given it a lot of thought, and they've got some really good ideas and principles to share with us on that. Then we have a break on the 26th of October, 2nd of November, a delicate one, the porn subject with Gary Steele. And then again on the 16th of November, this will be a fun one, Gender Differences and Marriage with Mark Vincent. So that'll be fun, I'm sure. Now, we were just wondering if any of you can help. We're wanting to do a topic for the end of the year, thriving with kids in the holidays. So if you know of any parents, or you are those parents who really have a great time with your kids on holiday, who know how to pile the kids into the van and keep them entertained and fend off that "are we there yet?" question, and enjoy each other at Bible schools and play games together. That's the sort of people we want to talk to. So yeah, get in touch with us. That'd be great. Tell us tonight. Send me a chat link if you can dob anyone in. Right, and if you want to get the Family Matters emails so you know what's coming up and what week it's on, email me, robert@thinkythings.com, and I'll send you some the email reminders and the links and the resources that we have. And there's a couple of really neat PowerPoints that I'll send out for this week as well.